Ever get that feeling? Like you're swimming in information overload, just piles and piles of data,
Oh, absolutely.
and you're just trying to make sense of it all, trying to connect the dots. Well, today, we're diving deep with a thinker who felt the same way, Michel Foucault.
Yeah, he really did.
We're digging into excerpts from his 2 lectures from 1976, where he gets surprisingly honest about his own intellectual journey. And let me tell you, it gets really interesting. So we're talking about Michel Foucault, right? This is a leading intellectual of the 20th century, and he's grappling with these big, complex ideas. But what really struck me as we were prepping for this deep dive is how relatable his struggle is.
Oh, definitely. It's almost like you wouldn't expect someone like Foucault to admit to feeling stuck, but he comes right out and says it. In the introduction to his first lecture, January 7th, 1976, he even calls this period a difficult moment in his work.
It's refreshing, isn't it? I mean, here's a guy who's explored everything from the history of prisons and the evolution of psychiatry to sexuality in ancient Greece, even the history of money. It's like, wow, talk about range. And yet, he still feels that sense of hitting a wall.
It's a good reminder that even the brightest minds grapple with uncertainty. But here's the thing. This isn't just Foucault bemoaning his writer's block. This stuckness he's feeling actually leads to a really profound point about knowledge itself.
Okay, so unpack that for us. What's Foucault getting at here?
He's realizing that maybe, just maybe, there isn't one grand theory that explains everything. Like, he's not even trying to force all of his work into a single neat package.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you look at the sheer diversity of his research. You've got prisons, sexuality, mental illness, the history of money.
Yeah,
It's all over the map.
exactly. And that's what makes it so fascinating. Instead of trying to find this one-size-fits-all answer, he's more interested in tracing what he calls the genealogy of power.
Genealogy of power. Okay, I'm going to be honest, that sounds a little intimidating. What does that even mean?
So it's not about kings and queens and laws and stuff like that. It's more about the subtle ways that power operates in our lives, often in ways we don't even realize.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. So it's less about like overt control and more about how power influences what we consider knowledge.
We got it. Think about how this knowledge then shapes how we see the world, how we understand ourselves, even how we interact with each other.
So it's like the rules of the game we don't even realize we're playing.
Exactly. And Foucault argues that these rules, these ways of knowing, they're not natural or inevitable, they're constructed, often to serve certain interests or maintain existing power structures.
That's a pretty radical idea when you think about it. So how does this genealogy of power actually play out in Foucault's work? Give us an example.
Let's take the example of confession, particularly as it relates to sexuality. Now, confession has been around for centuries, right? Primarily as a religious practice. But Foucault traces how, between the 17th and 19th centuries, confession became increasingly intertwined with sexuality. He actually dives into this in some of his other writings, too, looking at the history of sexuality.
So it's like how something so personal, so intimate as our sexuality gets caught up in these broader systems of power. And confession becomes a tool, even if unintentionally, for controlling and regulating that.
Precisely. Think about it. The confessional, this once sacred space, becomes a place where people are expected to divulge their deepest, most private thoughts and desires, shaping what's considered normal and, more importantly, what's not.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about how these things evolve and how something as simple as confession can become so loaded. And we don't even realize it. It's just how we've always done things. And Foucault even goes there. He delves into things like infantile sexuality, not to be shocking or anything, but to understand how even our perceptions of something so fundamental are shaped by forces outside of ourselves. It's really pretty profound.
It is, and that's what makes Foucault so relevant. And here's the thing about Foucault, and what I think makes these lectures so compelling, is that he's not claiming to have all the answers. He even says, I would like to lay down a few extremely schematic and dispersed lines of research. He sees himself as, and I love this, tracing lines, opening up these pathways of inquiry that others can follow.
So he's not saying, here's the answer, folks. It's more like, here's a thread, let's see where it leads. It's almost like he's saying, let's get lost in the complexity together.
Exactly. And that, I think, is a powerful message for all of us, especially in an age where it feels like we're constantly bombarded with information. It's okay not to have all the answers, to embrace the messiness of knowledge and to keep asking questions.
Absolutely. And maybe, just maybe, it's in those questions, in that space of not knowing, where we find the most interesting insights. So if you had to pick just one thread from Foucault's tapestry of thought prisons, sexuality, knowledge, power, which one calls out to you? What line of inquiry would you follow? Think about it.
And we'll be back next time to keep exploring.
See you then.